Evil West is a third-person action-adventure title made by Polish studio Flying Wild Hog, of fame from their reboot series of Shadow Warrior. Though I haven't played any of the games this studio has made, it's immediately obvious to me that this game wears its influence of titles like the recent God of War games on its sleeve, and although that may seem like a recipe for success, the delivery of those elements throughout the game does suffer too often in being rough around the edges and with a range of technical issues, especially where co-op gameplay is concerned. You'll be taking control of Jesse Rentier, a vampire hunter who is part of a clandestine vampire hunting organisation known as the Rentier Institute, ran by Jesse's father, William Rentier. The mission set before you is none other than clearing the scourge of vampires that roam the land in this fictitious, supernatural and horror-filled twist on the American frontier. You can expect to hack, slash and shoot your way through a large array of blood-soaked and monstrous beings through the short campaign of around 10 hours, in which time you'll feel, as I said, this game's major influences from the AAA space, but make no mistake in recognising that this is a title of much smaller scope and is harkening back to the days of where games didn't need to be perfect to be considered worthy of your time, which is all the more evident of this game's inclusion of a two-player co-op experience that is often very janky, and I will be discussing some issues with the co-op more in the Platinum Trophy section. This capture and overall review has been carried out using a PS5 copy of the game, and I won't be going through many main story spoilers, though I will feature some gameplay in the Platinum Trophy section of the final boss. When googling Evil West, you'll see that its Wikipedia entry is labelled as a third-person shooter. Whilst this is partially true in some aspects, this may give you the perception that this is an entry that's something like Gears of War, which is a purposeful mention of mine. In truth, the parallels in similar gameplay can be seen more so to 2018's God of War, which I have no doubt is one of the main drivers of the gameplay loop. Shooting is a large mechanic in the game, but there's more to think about when it comes to managing the combat scenarios overall. I'll start with the positives and say that the good thing about this game is that its main gameplay structure is pretty much consistent right throughout the game, which lends its hand in giving you a lot of time to perfect the combat that you'll be using. I'll go deeper on the combat in its own section, as I'd like to cover off all of the aspects of general gameplay, but just know that you'll be using a large set of melee, ranged and special abilities throughout this whole game. It's through the main gameplay arc of battling enemies that you'll be earning XP that allows you to unlock more perks, mainly within the hand-to-hand combat, to advance the type of combos and special moves that you have to play with. In addition to that, you can also find gold deposits throughout the game's traversable spaces that allows you to upgrade your additional weapon arsenal in various ways, such as electrified bullets or an increase on the amount of shots that can be fired before reloading, as a couple of examples. Outside of the combat, you can expect to be wondering about multiple area types within the 16 missions throughout the full game. Most of them consist of the horror version of the American frontier, but there are moments of respite in the game's saloon hub, which unfortunately serves no other purpose than speaking to the game's surrounding cast to progress the story and possibly find the odd lore expanding collectible. You can also use a perk respec option when you're here, but honestly, I never really saw a point to this, as every ability I unlocked throughout the playthrough guided my play style and build, and the replayability to change this up never really felt worth it. This game is perhaps one of the most linear titles I've played in a while. There is very little need of overall exploration, as most of the hidden collectibles and gold can be found on the very small branching paths from the main route through the game. It's on that path that you'll very quickly realise this game is mostly broken up by combat arena, short walk with a few items and or puzzle, combat arena, and then rinse and repeat. Thankfully, The somewhat bland game design is offset by the fact that you can play this whole game with a friend, which is in fact the main reason that I opted to play this in the first place. As per my previous mention of Gears of War, that is the go-to game, in my opinion, that had one of the best co-op experiences I always think back to when thinking about how to do co-op right. Sadly though, the co-op implementation here is very obviously just a bolt-on afterthought to the game as a whole, and for that reason, what could have been a great short co-op adventure turns more into a disjointed and frustrating technical experience, which becomes very cumbersome when trying to achieve the requirements on the Platinum Trophy. The co-op experience is in large part flawed in multiple ways. The first is that this game is very clearly meant to be progressed through solo, in that you cannot move onto the next areas without both players being present to do so, with a complete lock in place unless both players are stood in the same spot. It isn't such a big problem, as you'll likely always be ready to move on to the next area together anyway, but it does break up the momentum of what's happening when every time you hit a doorway, you have to basically stand there until your buddy catches up. The more problematic issues come on the technical front, in that your co-op partner is likely going to experience many HUD glitches, such as their ability cooldowns not showing correctly, them being downed and you not able to revive them, and vice versa, both of which require a complete reset of the game session to invite that player back into the lobby, all of which has to be done via the main menu each time. On top of that, inviting another player to the game lobby is a hit and miss success rate of about 50%. The only fix seems to be that both players restarting their game completely, which sadly doesn't seem to work all the time. The biggest issue comes down to the progression, which the multiplayer menu does explain slightly, but this becomes a true pain later when going for that Platinum Trophy. We were also plagued multiple times with the game crashing specifically in co-op before a boss fight, where the only fix was to launch the game in solo, progress to the next checkpoint in the boss fight, and then restart the multiplayer session again, thus allowing you to continue. All that being the case, it's this game being a co-op experience in the first place that often gave us the ability to laugh and just push through the random problems. This game's joy lives and dies by its combat. For the most part, this is well done, and you can expect to be pummeling enemies away using a variety of punches and weapons to do so. At first, it does seem like there is a lot going on, and it is difficult to tell where all the hits and even enemy health bars are, but once you've put a couple of hours into learning the ropes on this, it does become quite a satisfying experience to land a good combo and finishing move that sees the enemy torn apart. What I do like is that, having played this whole game in co-op, both me and my friend had two completely different playstyles initially, with me being much more brawler based, using my dash forward attacks and punch combos to put the pressure on the enemy, with him sitting further back and firing his weapon arsenal away on them. It was clear early on that we were pushing different avenues through the skill trees, although as time pressed on into our second playthrough for the higher difficulty, you do start to rely on the same movesets over and over again, which does make things a little stale if you're planning on going for that ever shiny Platinum Trophy. Regardless of the playstyle you'll be using, you'll always fall back to using your cooldown abilities, which give a varied attack output to them in the guise of bombs or a flamethrower, amongst a few others. Those abilities, along with the God of War like Rage mode, make for a balancing act when it comes to making sure you throw out your abilities against some of the tougher enemies. There are at first glance quite a variety of enemies that you'll face off against, and some of their designs are very cool, with the vampire bat being one of the more standout appearances. However, the mechanics of the enemies tend to fall into three categories. The first being those that are a simple cannon fodder and are dispatched within a couple of seconds. The second being more troublesome of the enemy types and have some sort of dodge or invincible mechanic, and the third being those with increased health bars that you need to spend some of your stronger abilities on to bring them down. Once you've learned all of these, each of the encounters becomes a juggle through your moveset, and the downside being that the challenge does dissipate quite quickly once you know how to handle that enemy type. You'll find yourself quickly leaning into certain abilities that can manage crowds well, and it's because of that that you can expect to see the same type of finisher animation over and over. Even though that is the case, it does not seem to get old, and it's why the combat does work quite well for the most part. Playing through this game on the standard difficulty is quite easy to get through. Upping the difficulty to evil does start to present a little bit more of a challenge, and making sure that you're saving and using your abilities at the right times for certain enemies, all of which is welcomed for those looking for something a little bit more than mindlessly mashing R1. The evil difficulty doesn't really make things too much different, as it just allows the enemies to hit harder and have bigger health bars, although the last two missions specifically do feel to have the biggest difficulty spike that did take us a few attempts to get through. Something that I wish was more of the case in this game is how the hand-to-hand combat abilities don't feel so different. You're more or less able to string every combo with a single button. I'd hope for a more versatile moveset within the combat in this game, but the focus is clearly more geared towards the cycling through your abilities with their cooldowns than actually mixing up your playstyle, dependent on the enemy that you're facing. The story didn't hold much weight for both me or my friend. I get what they were trying to go with, although the subsequent playthroughs did make me a little bit more familiar with the cast of characters. The initial playthrough had us caring less and less. The cinematics are well made, but the voice talent behind some of the side characters, as well as the archetypes clearly on display for each of them, does make it harder to be inclined to care about their motives or objectives. Pretty much all of the cast are very one-dimensional, and the opinion that you formulate on them likely won't change from when you initially meet them. The story beats do serve their purpose in explaining why you are where you are, as far as location goes, but the dialogue throughout the missions that isn't in the cinematics often serves more of a hindrance if you're having to talk to those NPCs in order to move on. I don't really have that much to say about the story, as I didn't really feel anything for it. To me, this game is very much about its gameplay loop and its combat and getting through the levels. There are a couple of comical moments with a certain character that pops up now and again, but beyond that, many of the game's more serious elements often fell on deaf ears in comparison to its comic relief. What I can say for sure is that do not expect to come here and be blown away with the world building and the lore detail, as even in the collectibles that you pick up, the information presented does little in the way of expanding the story in any deep or meaningful way. The journey to Platinum seemed very straightforward, with an easy to understand trophy list and nothing too difficult at first glance. The problem comes with an understanding of the co-op system and how that works in terms of progression. To put it simply, the joining player does not have their own character save, so all progress of theirs is tied to the main player. Initially this didn't matter, as we planned on playing through the whole game on evil difficulty, collecting all of the collectibles and then finishing up the misc trophies after our initial playthrough. The evil difficulty playthrough was fine, and all collectibles required for trophies were easy to locate through some careful looking in the environments. It was actually quite enjoyable playing through with a better understanding of the combat and a slight increase on difficulty in utilising the abilities that I'd previously mentioned. However, we had two boss specific trophies remaining at the end that meant defeating them with a set of conditions to be achieved. This would have been fine if there was a form of level select available to do these encounters. Unfortunately, the only level select available in the game is one via the lore menu and is only accessible to use in single player. Initially, I thought, oh, that's fine, we can do them separate, no biggie. Sadly, as my friend's progression was also tied to me, this meant he could not launch his own single player game, as none of his abilities and progression were present when doing so. As you've likely guessed from all of that, this meant that we then had to play through the whole game again on the lowest difficulty in order to speedrun it to get those last two boss trophies for both myself and my friend, taking great care to make sure that we did them first time, otherwise it would have meant doing another run. It's for this reason that if you are going for the Platinum Trophy, I would highly recommend you do so solo, unless you have somebody else willing to commit the game 3 times through, specifically with you. This can only be explained really as poor game design, and further proves that the co-op element of this game can only have been an afterthought for its inclusion. Could I recommend Evil West? The answer is simply not at its default Steam store asking price. I managed to play this game as it was in the PlayStation Plus library, and thus it cost me nothing to do so. Don't think I could recommend paying £40 for this game. If it were on sale at around half the cost, That's probably closer to the mark of what I think this game is worth, but keep in mind, the main reason that I did play this is that me and my friend both noticed that it was co-op, and we felt like we wanted one of those co-op experiences that we've been longing for since the days of games like Gears of War. Its combat is undoubtedly fun to play with, even after subsequent playthroughs, but given the number of issues we faced, the story that we didn't really care for, and the janky co-op system that is in place, there are better story and co-op experiences out there to spend your time and money on. Avoiding co-op entirely could be an option, but then that would only leave me more reliant on the story interactions to recommend, which I find hard to do. We had fun playing this game, however, I do doubt that either of us would look to return, play a future sequel to this game in this universe. Though I can say that I will keep an eye on all future releases from Flying Wild Hog, as I have no doubt that with some time and iteration, games they make will only get better, as they clearly do have a handle on things when it comes to the gameplay. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch this review. I hope you enjoyed it. Please consider subscribing to the channel, as I'll likely be doing more of these in the future, and if you have any thoughts or opinions on the videos, please feel free to comment below, as I'd like to make these both as entertaining and helpful as possible. My name is Liquidizer, it's been a pleasure, and I hope to see you again real soon.